Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another Half Pint session. Today, I am interviewing someone who I've actually met in person, and I first saw her online, then met her in person, and then only really afterwards truly discovered the very important contribution that she has made to Lewis studies through Twitter. I know such a thing seems impossible, but it is actually true. Kat Coffin, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks so much. Thanks for having me.
Now, we first met at a conference. It was
hmm
at Montreat, and
2019.
yeah, and we both got to hang out with Douglas Gresham and drink some scotch.
Oh, yeah. Best time of my life. Like core memory, I think.
Now, I've got you on here today because this season on 90 Month, we have been looking at The Last Battle. And you have an infamous Twitter thread that is very related to The Last Battle and particularly the problem of Susan. But we'll get to that in a moment. Do you mind just kicking things off by just telling us a little bit about yourself, how Lewis and Inklings came into your life, and what you're doing now?
All right. I went to a conservative evangelical LCMS Lutheran school growing up, and I think that was probably my first introduction to C.S. Lewis. They were very big on apologetics, especially in my high school. So Lewis was pretty much a foundational text, and I remember being read to in class The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe in the third grade, and I remember not liking it. And
Okay.
yeah, I was a very pious 8-year-old, and I felt strongly that C.S. Lewis was plagiarizing God and just did not like him taking Jesus's story and redoing it with animals. Really, really, really did not care for that. And it wasn't until high school I reread the Chronicles, all of them, and really kind of fell in love. And I asked for my older brother for more works by this author. He gave me Mere Christianity, said it's really dry. It's not like Narnia. It might take you a long time to finish it. And I finished it in one night. And that was just the catalyst to just becoming really obsessive about Lewis. I'm neurodivergent, so when I get really interested and hyper focused on something, I need to absorb everything around it. And so I was going through his bibliography. I got into scholarship and research when I went to college and started publishing and presenting and submitting. Really, really got interested in how gender was portrayed, especially in his fiction. And what I'm doing now is I just finished my master's degree at NYU. Well, I say just finished, it was a year ago. I finished December of 2022, which I promise feels like a month ago, uh, not a year ago. But so just finished my master's degree, and I'm in the process of turning what was my master's thesis into a book. I'm in discussion with Kent State University on that current proposal, and I have a play in the works,
Wonderful.
and that's what's going on now.
Well, we'll
That
get
and
in.
making people angry on Twitter are all of my C.S. Lewis stuff.
True, true. Yeah, it's always entertaining. I will just say that.
Good.
But we'll get into your dissertation, the book, and the play fairly shortly. But before that, we need to talk about the problem of Susan and
Mm.
this Twitter thread. So just before we hit record, I was telling you that whenever I see discussions of the problem of Susan online, inevitably at some point I will see your thread referenced. First of all, can you just tell us where did that thread come from? And then after that, I'll read the section that everyone gets uptight about, and then we can talk about it.
All right. The thread came from an ongoing frustration of the same interpretation that I saw repeatedly from secular scholars that was driving me up a wall because it was one interpretation, a interpretation. It was not the interpretation, I guess. And it just culminated into um, I think I'd had a thread a couple weeks earlier that I very cheekily mentioned. I was tipsy when I did this other thread, but now I have all my papers in front of me, and now I'm going to do this thread. And I think I was at work at the time, and it was just during like a slow moment or a lunch hour, and I just decided to just pop off on this tweet and my own particular literary analysis of the arc of Susan across the Narnian Chronicles, and that's where the thread came from.
Yeah, I've always found it funny that this is on Twitter, which is a medium that doesn't really lend itself to extended discussion. But it turns out that if you keep replying to your own previous response enough, you can eventually write a book, which is pretty much what you did. Now, we spoke about this section in our episode with Andrew and Matt and Kristen, but I'm just going to just reread the section for people that just want a little bit of a refresher, and then you just unpack it for us. Sir, said Tyrion, when he had greeted all these, if I have read the chronicle aright, there should be another. Has not your majesty two sisters? Where is Queen Susan? My sister Susan, answered Peter, shortly and gravely, is no longer a friend of Narnia. Yes, said Eustace, and whenever you try to get her to come and talk about Narnia or do anything about Narnia, she says, what wonderful memories you have. Fancy you're still thinking about all those funny games we used to play when we were children. Oh, Susan, said Jill, she's interested in nothing nowadays except nylons and lipstick and invitations. She always was a jolly sight too keen on being grown up. Grown up indeed, said Lady Polly. I wish she would grow up. She wasted all her school time wanting to be the age she is now, and she'll waste all the rest of her life trying to stay that age. Her whole idea is to race on to the silliest time of one's life as quick as she can, and then stop there as long as she can. So, what's the typical interpretation, and what are your thoughts and feelings on that?
So the typical interpretation, which existed before this popularization, but was widely popularized by J.K. Rowling, thank you, Joanna, Neil Gaiman, thank you, Neil, and Philip Pullman, thank you, Philip.
Which always kills me, because they're authors that I actually do quite enjoy. I've actually even started getting into the Harry Potter thing a little bit. I'm just very tentatively putting my toes in. But they're all authors that I've enjoyed. But whenever I read their hot takes, they are exactly that. They are kind of hot takes, and I don't think you thought about this for very long.
Major pinnacles of modern fantasy somehow arrived at a very wrong conclusion about Susan. And that conclusion being that what Lewis is talking about is Susan's sexual maturity. Basically, they are shaming. The interpretation either goes Lewis is shaming her because she is having sex, or he is shaming her for being interested in feminine things, in frippery, and that's like a misogynistic look. So both interpretations pretty close together. Neither one really, in my opinion, what Lewis meant through Susan. But what's frustrating about this interpretation is it is constantly bandied about as if that is there's no argument with, like, they say it was, this is of course what Lewis meant, when no, it doesn't. Feel very strongly that it isn't. That is people drawing their own conclusions and reading into the line of nylons and lipstick a little bit too winkly. That
So, how would you respond to Neil Gaiman and J.K. Rowling and the others if you got the opportunity to call them to task and point out some things that they might have perhaps missed?
I would usually, my big thing with Susan is I say that we need to look at her arc in Prince Caspian. Because I feel very strongly that Susan's arc in Prince Caspian foreshadows what happens in the last battle. And what happens in Prince Caspian is Susan is a bit of a stick in the mud when she returns to Narnia. She is very controlling. She is kind of grasping for an authority that she should not be grasping at. She tends to treat Edmund and especially Lucy as, oh, Lucy, you're being so silly. You didn't really see Aslan in the forest. You must have been dreaming, and being very obnoxious. And I'm the older sister. Of course, I'm the grown up. You are just being small and babyish. And it's particularly aggravating because book before Prince Caspian, you went through this, Susan. You didn't believe your younger sister when she was telling the truth, that there was a magical land through the wardrobe, and you were supposed to have learned a lesson from that. But she's kind of repeating the same mistake, which we also see in the same book. Edmund does not repeat that mistake and actually says, no, last time we didn't listen to Lucy, and I ended up looking pretty foolish, so I'm going to stick with her. And so and it all culminates into this scene where all of the Pevensies are walking through the forest, and one by one they finally start to see Aslan in the distance. Lucy sees him first, and Susan sees him last. And throughout this whole hike in the woods, she is complaining. She is trying to make Lucy feel bad about it. She's being like, I just imagine if I was behaving so childishly. But it turns out she is wrong. And she approaches Aslan with tears in her eyes, and he goes, come, child, feel my breath. Are you brave again? You've listened to fears. Are you brave again? And she says, I think so, Aslan. And so we take that scene, that whole arc of her acting, trying to be too grown up, and bring that to her adulthood, her adolescence, and it's the same arc. She just hasn't reached seeing Aslan again. She's just still in that midway of that Prince Caspian arc, just older.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way of approaching it. And this season, we've been doing Lewis's letters, and we read through letters to children. And in one of those very letters, he points out to one of the children who's writing to him, haven't you noticed that in the 2 books that you've read, because he's talking about the publishing of The Last Battle, he says, haven't you noticed that in the 2 books you've read, she's rather fond of being too grown up? That it is just it's a recapitulation. She's stuck in a rut. She's making the same mistake again. And he just says in another letter that she just turned into a rather silly, conceited woman. But there's another aspect to this scene in The Last Battle, because a lot of people seem to think that the door is closed, the case is complete, is finished, it's done and dusted. But Lewis says that is actually not the case. He says that there's still plenty of time for her to mend, and perhaps she'll get to Aslan's country in the end in her own way. So why is it that people think that everything's done and dusted with Susan?
Well, they haven't read his letters to children, which they really should. It's a phenomenal collection. I think my thought is that it's an easier way to kind of dismiss Lewis out of hand, is to just be like, well, he's just an old misogynist, sexist Christian fantasy. Who cares? Like, he had a bad take on women, and we can just ignore everything else he said. And sure, Narnia is nice, and I have a lot of fond memories of it, but I don't have to lean into any essential truths of the book. I don't have to think about it hard if I can immediately write Lewis off like that, as just like a chauvinist, misogynistic, old Oxfordian Don. So, I don't know. That's my theory.
Yeah. I think also to give the most charity to that position, it does sound like everything is ending in The Last Battle, and people do kind of miss the reason that the other children are there. It's the fact that there's been a train crash and they're dead. But Susan isn't. And I think this is one of the more interesting things that Lewis actually sets up, that he then never writes about. It's the fact that Susan is still alive in England, and most of her family and some of her closest friends are now dead. What happens next? And when the children would write to Lewis, he would very often encourage them, you go and tell her story. And that's a nice bridge into what you've done. You've tried to continue telling Susan's story. So would you mind telling us about this play that you wrote and what's happening with it?
Not at all. In 2018, I had a dream of that I had written a play about Susan as continuing on from, and essentially within the dream, and I don't know why it was such a detailed dream, but or I do know why it was such a detailed dream, but I dreamed that I used aspects of C.S. Lewis's A Grief Observed and Meditations on a Tool Shed, as well as Susan's story, and combined it into a play. And I woke up and I called my mother and I told her about this dream, and she said, "You better start writing this down right now." And I was like, "Okay." And and I did. And the play is Susan grappling with not only the grief of losing her family, but losing her place and her foundations, and what to do with that grief. And is she going to be brave enough to face where she might have been wrong in how she interacted with her siblings on Narnia? So, what's currently happening with that is I have an actress, I have a director, and we have a venue, and we applied for a theater grant in New York, and we're waiting to hear from that. We will know in March, and we are setting up a table read for the first time in February. And I would love to live stream the table read if at all possible. We know the play itself, we were very clear that we do want it to be accessible online, so that is definitely going to be a part of what's going to happen. But I'm very excited about the play. Doug Gresham has read it and loved it, and I have been given permission by the C.S. Lewis estate to stage it, which is very rare.
I was going
And
to say, yeah.
Very deep honor that I'm not at all freaked out about.
Don't mess this up.
Exactly.
But I do think Susan's story her continued story is interesting, particularly given what you've mentioned already in Prince Caspian. When Susan was being a stick in the mud, Aslan said that she was afraid. She listened to fears. And the opening lines of A Grief Observed is, "Nobody told me grief felt so much like fear." And that's exactly what Susan is going to be going through as most of her family is wiped out.
This is a spoiler, but those are the opening words to the play.
I approve.
Yeah, you could play a drinking game at Pints with Jack. Is if you recognize a line from C.S. Lewis that wasn't in Narnia, take a drink.
I think that could get a little dangerous. Yeah.
It could with this play. I wrote it, so it'd be far more than a half pint.
Well, is there anything else that you'd like to talk about? Anything else that you're thinking about doing, or you've got plans to do?
Oh yeah. So I am really starting to turn my attentions on Joy Davidman. My master's thesis was actually about her and her life, and her life with Lewis, and her life as a writer outside of Lewis. I think that's something C.S. Lewis and Inkling scholarship is missing, is a real deep dive. There's been some, I would definitely recommend Dr. Don King, Abigail Santamaria's fantastic biography, of course, and Becoming Mrs. Lewis, Patty Callahan Henry's, is a wonderful, lovely fictional adaptation of it. So I would really like to, I think in the next coming years, a lot of my scholarship is going to be focused on Joy, on her writing and her relationship with Lewis, and the collaborative nature, which a lot of this has already been kind of talked about. But yeah, deep dive on Joy Davidman.
My co-host Andrew is currently reassessing the entire chronology of their relationship. At the start of most episodes, we need to rethink everything. We need to rethink everything. It's like, okay, we're reading letters to children now. We'll come back to this.
I totally relate, honestly.
Yeah, Joy is a very curious personality. At times, I really don't like her. At times, I think she's really cool, but at other times, I don't think I like you very much. She is definitely a very complicated person. Yeah, kind of obnoxious. I didn't want to say it, but yeah.
I'm the feminist scholar, so I can say it. No,
you're allowed to say that.
But
yeah.
I'm allowed. I have the pass. No, but no, she is. I think that's kind of why I love her. Is she's temperamental. She's sparky. She shoots off her mouth, before she thinks. If this sounds familiar to you seeing me on Twitter, you're correct. And I think that's kind of why I think there is something really beautiful that C.S. Lewis fell in love with this odd duck, with this oddball who was obnoxious and mouthy. I think that gives a lot of hope to a lot of mouthy women, myself included. But I also think it encourages us to look at her a little more deeply and also look at Lewis a little bit more deeply. Not just see him as a lionized figure, but as a human man who, had his own flaws and faults and maybe connected with Joy on that.
I recently interviewed Dr. Diana Glyer and Dr. Don King on The Major and the Missionary about Warnie Lewis's letters to Blanche Biggs. Blanche, she overtook my number one favorite female person in the sphere of the Inklings. Sorry, Dorothy L. Sayers, but dang, I read her letters and just fell in love with her. But I raised the question of, do you think there could have ever been any romantic thoughts between Warnie and Blanche? And ultimately, we can't know. There's a few clues that they certainly were moving much closer together, even in their sort of twilight years. But I said, part of me could very much see that happening for the same reason why I think Lewis married Joy rather than, say, someone like Ruth Pitter, who is on paper a better fit. But I actually think the slightly aggressive American New Yorker was actually something that I think Lewis rather liked, and that while a lot of his colleagues didn't warm to that at all, I think that there was something in her playful combativeness that he actually really enjoyed. And so who knows, Blanche Biggs, she was an Aussie, and they are very similar to Americans in certain regards, and certainly in terms of their boldness. So who knows?
I mean, I think that has a big to do with it. I think Lewis liked being challenged. I think he liked having an argumentative student, and I think he liked when somebody pushed back on everything. That's what kind of drives me crazy on, this is so nerdy, but the Elizabeth Anscombe debate. I hate when biographers claim that Lewis was so ashamed of being beaten by a woman. No. He was like, all right, that was fair. Let me rewrite this chapter in Miracles. Like, there wasn't a misogynistic compunction to that affair. And I think he really did enjoy being challenged and going back to that, which is why I think, even though I don't think Lewis would have necessarily affirmed my entire worldview, I think he would have liked being challenged by it. And I know I like being challenged by it too, oddly enough. But yeah, I think they definitely fit. Both absolute geniuses, both brilliant, both went through childhood trauma. Yeah, and I'm ready for a cool film adaptation of Jack and Joy.
Yeah, that would be entertaining, because Shadowlands is obviously all focusing on her death. Yeah. It would be very interesting to see them try and do the 3 years that they were married and something of the run up to it. Because I mean, there's plenty of drama there. You've got alcoholism, like affairs, transatlantic trips. It's like it's basically a movie already.
It's a very dramatic, beautiful story, and interesting and complicated, and you gotta love it. You just every single bite of it.
And there has to be at least one scene of them playing Scrabble with all of the tiles, using any word that they want.
Sure. I was playing Scrabble with my family, and I was like, "Can I use Japanese words?" Because my second language is Japanese, and they go, "No." And I was like, "Lewis and Joy used ancient Greek and Latin." They're just like, "Well, we're not playing with Lewis and Joy."
I've tried the same thing with my wife in Latin. She says no.
Boo. Next, like, C.S. Lewis con, we're all getting together and having like a huge thing of Scrabble, and it's just multiple languages. It's going to be so insane.
I think that could get quite out of hand. I like it. Wonderful. Well, Kat, if people want to find out more about you and what you're up to with the planned table read and your other projects, where should they go?
I am most accessible on Twitter. It's unfortunately my social media of choice because I can't shut up. Twitter handle is Cat in Oxford. I have a newsletter that's Substack dot Cat in Oxford. Same handle. And yeah, reach out to me there. I love making friends and
Possibly
not
enemies.
making friends. And I was like, I wasn't, I like that you said it, so I didn't have to. Making nemesis.
Yes. And I will admit that I stared at your Twitter profile for a long time before I kind of worked out the reason that you had two emojis next to your name, one of which was a cat and the other which was a coffin. I'm smart, honest. My parents spent a lot of money on my education. Well,
You got
anyway,
there eventually.
I did. Well, Kat, thanks for coming on the show. And viewers, please join us again next time when we'll continue going further up and further in. Cheers.